Rumble and Rebel News sue MP Sachs and others for conspiring to violate free speech rights. This is from Rumble. Toronto, April 7th, 2025, Globe News Wire. Rumble Canada, the high-growth video platform and cloud service provider, has joined Rebel News Network and its founder, Ezra Levant, in suing the Government of Canada, member of Canadian Parliament Yara Sachs, and other officials for conspiring to deprive them of their constitutional right to free expression. The lawsuit, filed today in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, alleges that the defendants unsuccessfully tried to block 2 lawful and peaceful public gatherings celebrating free speech in the Toronto area last year simply because they disagreed with the political points of view of the organizers and participants. The suit alleges that the officials tried to thwart the event, which included Donald J. Trump Jr. as a featured speaker, by imposing unreasonably high charges for security measures that were not needed and designed only to prevent the events from taking place. The plaintiffs are seeking reimbursement in the amount of $37,177.80 for the excessive security costs, $250,000 in punitive damages, and legal expenses, and have requested a trial in Toronto. So, Chris, tell me more.
Yeah, so we hosted an event with Ezra and Rebel News Live back in, was it the summer of last year?
Yeah,
and it was a great event, packed event, sold out event. We had Viva Frey come out. We had Glenn Greenwald come out. We had Donald Trump Jr. come out, Kimberly Guilfoyle. We had a great lineup. And it was really just, advocating free speech and promoting the Rumble shows. And it kind of dovetailed into the Rebel News Live event. And, we ran into some obstacles prior to the event. And, from my point of view, it was very odd and something didn't make sense. And it wasn't until post event that Ezra was able to unravel quite a bit. And since he was, behind a lot of the freedom of information requests and what he found, I'll let him take it from here and kind of explain what we found.
Sure, thanks. Every year we do this fan gathering of our most enthusiastic viewers, and there's never a problem, of course. This year we held it at a venue that was on a former Canadian military base. About 30 years ago, it was an Army base or Air Force base. Now it's sports venues, event venues. I didn't think about that, but that's important. Hold that thought for a second.
Sure.
So we go ahead and we do a deal with the event venue, and we add in, as we often do, a little free speech clause in the agreement saying you can't cancel us just because some people don't like us, because sometimes Antifa tries to shut us down. So we signed this great contract. We're all excited. Sold out. Wow, Don Jr.'s coming up to Canada. But then the operator of the venue says, guys, I'm being told that you need an extra $40,000 in security. What? There's no need for that. That's insane. We already have security.
Let's just add that we already spent a ton on security, just for our own purposes.
Yeah.
We
we
hired police. We did everything that was required to do.
I mean, some VIPs like Don Jr., but I mean, it was a very secure thing. And $40,000, there's no way the conference would have been able to support that. And the venue operator, he said it's the landlord, the underlying landlord, because it used to be a military base, it's still owned by the government of Canada. So the government agency that owned the substratum heard about this event, and it was only later when we did freedom of information requests of this government landlord that we found hundreds and hundreds of pages of emails. How do we stop this? These are undesirables. We've got to find something in the lease. We checked the lease. It's clean. We can't get them that way. We'll try this. Okay, we'll say that there's protesters coming. And then we did
They put that stuff in emails?
They put it all in writing.
If you scroll down a
Sure.
little bit, it'll actually have some quotes of the
If it happens on or near our property, we might attract an undesirable crowd, wrote one official in an email to colleagues. I am wondering if you think there is any language within the lease agreement that would permit us to stop this event from happening, wrote another. Based on my review, I don't think there is, but I would appreciate your opinion. It's remarkable that they would put that in electronic communications at all, considering that you have something like a FOIA request in Canada.
Yeah, I was surprised you even had FOIA requests.
Honestly,
that kind of shocked me.
Legitimately.
Yeah.
I don't think, like, this is the government agency that manages real estate for the government. I don't think they get a lot of freedom of information requests.
Did you get pushback on the FOIAs?
No. Well,
all?
actually, they blacked out most of them. So what we see here is the stuff they're least ashamed of.
Oh my!
See the other stuff.
And the thing is, in the lawsuit, they will not be able to black out anything other than legally privileged material. Wow. So if this is the tip of the iceberg, and then they kept saying to us, oh no, there's going to be this massive police threat. We have freedom of information from the cops who, as late as the day before, said we haven't heard anything, not even chatter. All the Antifa types in the city were at the University of Toronto Hamas encampment. They weren't going to schlep up to this military base. So the whole thing was made up. It was designed to get us to cancel the event. And I got to say, it would have worked, because Rebel News doesn't have an extra 40 grand kicking around for BS security. But Rumble stepped up and said, this event's got to happen. In the name of free speech, we can't be hounded out of Canada. And so Rumble stepped up, and I was honestly of two minds. On the one hand, I was thrilled the event went forward. It was a great event. But on the other hand, to pay a ransom was against my fiber. But we found out what went on through these FOIA requests, and now we've named 5 different bureaucrats, plus the local member of parliament. That would be like a local congressman saying, tear up that contract. It's none of your damn business.
Was it finding out that where it was located that made you look into it and want FOIA requests, knowing that it was government property?
Well, I did. I never even thought of that. Like, who thinks about who owns the substrate when you're doing an event? I never even thought of it.
Right.
It's called the Canada Lands Company. I mean, I barely knew what they were.
Interesting.
But when they started making threats, our venue operator was scared. They were bullying him. Wow. He's a normie. He's a normal guy. He's not used to this. When we had him sign this non-deplatforming agreement, I don't think he really knew what it would be like. And when the government of Canada says, you cancel that, and you're a normal guy, you get scared. And only because of Rumble were we able to go through with it. And the very last day of our event, the local member of parliament does this rant on Twitter about how we're racist and we're not allowed in the district. Who the hell are you, lady? So we'll have a chance to find out her answer to that question. Who the hell are you? Because we named her in the lawsuit. I feel great about this. And I'm giving Chris a shout out, because there's no way we would have had the means to do this on our own. And I know he's fighting for free speech in Brazil and in France and other semi-free countries. I just never would have thought but this is what I said earlier. We need the First Amendment in Canada.
That's something that I want to touch on. But Chris, he mentioned that you've got multiple. I know about the one in Brazil, right? Because the Supreme Court of Brazil is coming down on Rumble because of people that you host, right?
Yeah, so Alexander, the Supreme Court Justice, Alexander
the guy
Moraes,
that dresses like he's from Star Wars.
Yeah, he went and shut us down in Brazil completely because we didn't censor. It's actually, the story dates back many years ago, and we actually shut down Brazil and walked away from that market because they were telling us that we needed to take down creators, and we said no. So at that moment, we decided, all right, we're American. We're based in Sarasota. We're gonna follow American law, not Brazilian law. We're not gonna be subject to Chinese law or North Korean law or Russian law.
Now, Glenn Greenwald, he does a lot of his content on Rumble, and he's in Brazil, correct?
Yeah, but he broadcasts to an American audience. So this was the restriction they wanted us is to block in Brazil.
Okay.
Of which we did not comply. We ended up shutting down completely, and then they sent us a notice and they said, you're back. You're allowed back in Brazil. The notice that we sent you is now, does not stand anymore. And it was with respect to one of the creators, Monarch.
Didn't something like this happen with X in Brazel? Or
yes, yeah. Okay. They took a completely different approach. They're completely complying with the Brazilian government right now. Whereas Elon withstood it for about a month and then caved and then ended up complying. What we ended up doing is they sent us a letter saying Monarch's allowed, like this old order that we sent you is no longer valid and no longer needed to be enforced. So we open up Brazil on Friday or Saturday morning. By Sunday night, we get another letter. saying you need to shut down this guy now.
It's a trap.
And we're like, we already opened up, and we've already done this once, and this was like, we decided to sue them in a U.S. court. So we ended up filing for a TRO, an injunction in a U.S. court, and nevertheless, the Justice Moraes still pushed through on his courts to shut us down at the telco level in Brazil. So we're completely inactive, and he's fining us daily, I believe, in the Brazilian market he wanted us to provide data. We're a U.S. company, to provide data to him about a user that's in the United States and he wanted all the data from that user in the United States and all the subscribers and people watching him from within the United States.
Okay.
And that's just totally not tolerable. I believe that same request went out, and they fined X for that too. I don't know what X's approach was on that, but I know what our approach was. We're like, go pound sand, see you later.
Yeah.
We're not going to comply with this type of stuff. So that we've dealt with Brazil. We're dealing with the same thing in the courts of France as well. We're shut off in France, so we're not available in France. And the French story is ironic. 2 years ago, we had like every media organization write about how Rumble supports Russia and we're Russian puppets. And about a year ago,
It's the standard line.
yeah, that's the standard line, all the time. And it was because we wouldn't shut down, political channels that were supportive of Russia, because it didn't violate any of our policies. And we told France no. So we shut down France. And, a year later, the Russians come to us to shut down channels. And they end up shutting down Rumble entirely because we don't comply with the Russian requests. So that narrative of us being Russian puppets went right to the garbage pretty quickly. Meanwhile, YouTube was still functioning at the time in Russia. So obviously they were complying, and Rumble was not complying with the Kremlin. So I find that ironic. And then now, we've taken the battle to the Canadians up north with Rebel News. So we're pushing as much as we can. We've also done a lot of work here on the legal front in the United States. We fought Letitia James in New York State against one of her censorship bills, and we won that. And then she appealed it, and I haven't checked on the status of that. But
What was the actual?
It was something on the lines of it was something on the lines of moderation and forcing us to take requests. I don't know the exact details, but it was like it was something that definitely violated the First Amendment.
Sure.
And it was Rumble and the Fire organization that fought back against the New York State, and we won that, which was awesome. And then she appealed, obviously,
Of course.
we're and then we did another one. There's so many of them that we've been fighting, but it's a battle, and now the battle's in Canada. I think we're at a real interesting juncture in worldwide politics now that Trump has won the election. He's kind of resetting the game, and a lot of these, I don't know what to call it, but like this globalist agenda that is around the world, from Canada to Brazil to France to Europe, they all kind of have one set way of doing things that is very pro-censorship, very anti-free speech. It's about grabbing as much control as possible. Now there's a real fight against that with the United States. The United States there's nothing more important than that Constitution. After seeing the whole world and having you might have a good constitution in another country, but you might not have a justice system that's defending it properly. You actually have a justice system that is defending the Constitution. The Supreme Court is making the right rulings around the First Amendment for the most part. So that's really important. But after seeing that in America and seeing how it is in the rest of the world, we don't realize how great it is here. It is a fantastic thing, and we need to push that. And I do believe it's in the Canadian Bill of Rights.
It's one of the things
but it's been trampled on, and it's not being upheld.
So what is the actual, the freedom of speech protection in Canada? How's it worded, and what's the backstory on it?
Section 2 of our Charter of Rights looks great. Talks about freedom of thought, belief, faith, expression, media, freedom of association, freedom of assembly. That all sounds great. But Section 1 says subject to such limitations as may be demonstrably justifiable.
So in Section 1 of your Constitution or your Bill of Rights, it says anything that follows this is all dependent on the state.
Section 1 says we reserve wiggle room, but other than the wiggle room, we really like these freedoms of speech. So so if the government can demonstrably justify their infringement, they can do it. So we have a lovely freedom of the press until the government says, well, something's more important. And we saw that during the pandemic. We saw so many atrocious violations of civil liberties. And the truckers, who were peaceful, by the way, they just honked their horns. There were some parking violations, I grant you that. And they honked their horns. The Canadian government brought in martial law, the Emergencies Act, which had not even been used during 9/11. And they deployed riot horses. They seized bank accounts without legal process. I believe that if we had a First Amendment, that wouldn't happen. Now, by the way, later on, about a year later, our federal court said, okay, that was unconstitutional, even under the Wiggle Room Charter. But Canada does not have the culture of freedom that Chris was talking about. You've got to have that in your law schools, your law professors, your judges, your lawyers. And it's such a battleground in America right now. Like, who is the boss? These district court judges or Donald Trump? Like that. But it's not just Donald Trump. It's Trump, the winner of the election. Or can any one of 600 district judges veto him? In some ways, that's more powerful than a Supreme Court judge because they got to work in packs of 9.
Yeah.
I mean, so to have that culture of freedom in your law is so important. And the bad guys have had a long march through the institutions.
Yeah. I mean, the articulation in the First Amendment in the United States where it says Congress shall make no law, that is impactful. And I think that most Americans don't think about how important that language is because it's our Constitution puts the people before the government. And I don't know that I'm not familiar enough with other countries to say whether or not that's the case, but it sounds clearly like in Canada, the government gave itself room to violate whatever laws and rulings it wanted right in the first clause. And in the U.S., like I said, it says Congress shall make no law. And that language is extremely important.
And the Patriot Act did a lot of damage to us as well.
Well, there's times where, yes, I agree completely. And there's times where we've fallen short, but we have generally been pretty good about correcting the errors as well. That's another thing that I think that, again, this is not in any way trying to say that any of the violations of our Constitution are okay, but by and large, we've been pretty good about correcting them. There's a couple things that jumped to the top of my mind that they haven't managed to fix yet here in the U.S. Like, for instance, civil asset forfeiture that goes against the due process clause. The government can just take your stuff and say, well, we think that you're in the business of dealing drugs or whatever, so we're going to take your stuff. And then instead of actually having a court case against you, they have a court case against your inanimate object stuff. If you're traveling with cash, well, we can just take this. And so that's one of the more egregious things, but there really are only a few that don't get corrected. And we've had some significant fights. I think of Skokie, Illinois, the Supreme Court saying that it's acceptable for Nazis to demonstrate in a mostly Jewish town, which is, I'm not sure that would stand today in the United States. And I know that it wouldn't stand anywhere else in the world, but those kind of precedents, they matter here in the U.S. and like you said, it does speak to the culture that we have here.
I do think that there was a concerted effort after the Patriot Act was passed to remove that culture, not just in the institutions, but amongst the citizenry, to get them, what was the saying was always like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what the heck are you worried about? And that was something that was instilled in, whether it was millennials, for the sake of safety and their parents and Gen X, that they wanted you to believe that, in the name of safety, getting getting rid of those founding principles is okay because we're the government, we're not going to abuse it. And that's something that I think they underestimated just how much the love of those beliefs truly did run in the country.
I hate that phrase because they always redefine what's wrong.
Yeah, well, exactly.
They always
Right.
move the goalposts. And I remember seeing the breakdown in Canada with free expression during the compelled speech argument. That was insane. What was that, Bill C-16 or something?
17.
Yeah, it's crazy. How was that, dealing with that?
Well, that's getting worse than ever.
Really?
And now judges are being trained in that. So once the judges are being trained with that ideology, how do you even have a fair hearing?
Well, the institutions are captured.
You know, can I tell you one of the things I love about America?
Of course.
It's a 1971 court case. And in some ways, it feels like the apex of freedom of speech. I'm going to swear here. There was a fellow who went into a court in California with a shirt that said, "Fuck the draft." And he was found in contempt, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, you know, one man's profanity is another man's lyric. They said he needed to say the F word because that is what captured the depth of his emotions. He didn't want to say, "Ew, excuse me, I do object to the draft." He needed to say, "No, fuck the draft."
Right.
And imagine a Supreme Court saying no to a lower court. You must accept a man saying "fuck the draft" on his shirt. Like that is so far out there. But isn't that America?
Yep.
Ain't that America?
What is the Canadian public's view on these types of things? Like as a whole, like what does the citizenry feel of these types of things? Do they care as much as Americans do?
I'm afraid that, you know, Canadians probably think, well, we're more polite, so we would not accept that. Yeah. Well, that's a soft tyranny. I go to the UK from time to time. I follow the case of a journalist and activist named Tommy Robinson, who is in solitary confinement right now because a judge ordered him not to post a video to Twitter, and he did anyways. 9 months in solitary. You're not supposed to spend 9 months in solitary. It'll drive you mad, which is what they're trying to do. I come back every time, and I say, when I go to the UK, it's like I've got this dystopian time machine. I can see our future if we don't correct the path. I say, well, we're 5 years down the road from the UK, and maybe Americans are 10. But I would, you know, the cases that Chris talked about in Brazil, maybe there's no way an American would say, well, that's just like us. No, Brazil's hard to understand. They speak a foreign language. It's very far away. You probably don't know anyone from Brazil. But you know people from Canada. You probably know people from the UK. And I would say study that. Because I put it to you that the UK used to be wonderful for free speech, but it's eroding. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. The Times of London just did a study. On average, every day of the week, 30 people in the UK are arrested for something they do on social media. 30 a day.
Evil.
How far till America is there?
We were talking about this a little bit before the show, and you mentioned, or someone mentioned, that it's possible that not even 30 people in Russia are arrested per day. In Russia.
For social media.
Social media posts.
I wouldn't be surprised. The UK, look, they've got some real issues of race.
Now, granted, in Russia, you know, Putin kills people, so it's not to say that Russia's better than the UK. The UK doesn't, you know,
People poison themselves, I thought.
No, I don't believe it. I think Putin's actually the culprit behind that stuff. But it does speak to the you know, the UK may be softer in its punishment, but it's not more lenient to people that break the rules.
If there was a Russian named, I don't know what the Russian of Tommy Robinson, but if there's a Russian Tommy Robinson, a journalist sentenced to 9 months solitary confinement for putting a video on social media, I think he would be championed by Western civil rights groups, no? Amnesty International, the like. Why did we turn a blind eye to him? But you don't have to pick Tommy Robinson. I mentioned 30 a day. Douglas Murray is spot on in the UK. He says that there's some massive problems because of race and mass immigration, and they have a phenomenon there called rape gangs that I don't want to talk about at length now. Douglas Murray says it's very difficult to talk about those primary problems, to fix those primary problems. So the government prefers the secondary problem of people being rude and people being mean on social media. It's easier to arrest someone who talks about a rape gang than to stop the rape gang. And Douglas Murray is right.
If I understand correctly, there are problems with policing the rape gangs, because they're afraid of being called racist. And some of the rape gangs have been in operation for upwards of a decade. Is my understanding correct?
It is. There's a city called Rotherham, about 100,000 people, depends on how you measure the city, 100,000. So there's 50,000 women in that town. And then do the math, how many women between a certain age? 1,400 girls were raped in that town. 1,400. And they kept it under wraps for years. And later there was a government inquiry. How the hell did this go unreported? And if you look, I read the report, you can find it online, just type in Rotherham, Rotherham, inquiry. Again and again, the nurses, the social workers, the police, they all said, I was afraid I would be called racist because 80% of the rapists were Pakistani Muslim men, and the girls were white working class girls. So it was the perfect storm of political correctness. If you complained about it, you would be called racist. And so they didn't complain, and thousands of girls were turned over to these rape gangs for years.
And you know how what they're doing about that now is they're working with Netflix to make the show Adolescence available for everyone to watch there, despite the fact that it's taking one very specific issue and making it about something completely different, mainly what they call incels. And yeah.
That is rife with problems of its own. A 13-year-old kid is the subject of the show, and they're calling him an incel. A 13-year-old kid has no business being, having sexual intercourse in the first place. Incel means involuntary celibacy. You should not be even hoisting that phrase on a kid, first of all. And second of all, the kid was, in the story, the kid was being bullied by the girl that he killed. So she was bullying the kid mercilessly. That has nothing to do.
You avoided the central fact. It's based on a black killer, and they made him white in the Netflix.
The creator of the show didn't specify any one incident, so that's not necessarily true. But you're right, but you're not right. But the point is that Keir Starmer is making this a huge part of like what's going on in Britain right now.
Literally and prescribed this.
Exactly. And what you're saying is that you're saying that they're focusing on one thing when what they should actually be focusing on is something else. They're distracting you with this when the problem is something much, much different, much more easily defined, but much, much harder to talk about.
Yeah, it's tough over there, and there was a horrific stabbing in a town called Southport. Someone went it was a Taylor Swift themed party for young girls. He went in and stabbed and stabbed and stabbed, and it led to race riots.
Yes.
And Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, who used to be the chief prosecutor of the UK, set up 24-hour-a-day courts to pack through as many people as possible. No, I'm not talking about the stabber. I'm talking about people who talked about it on social media. And he was sentencing people to 2 years in prison for having a bigoted reaction to this stabbing by a Muslim convert. You're not solving the original problem. You're trying to mask it. That's why I call it a dystopian time machine.
Yeah.
Look what's happening there and think, do I see the trend over here? I feel it in Canada. I can only imagine the places you deal with, how far it is down the line.
Canada's a interesting place. To answer your question a little earlier, I think there's a good base of Canadians that think very similarly to Americans. I would say like 20%. But when I start watching the political discourse in Canada now during this election that's coming up, and watching like the Conservative Party and then watching the Liberal Party and having a tough time knowing the difference, makes me think maybe it's not 20%. I don't know. But the trucker protests and all the previous things that have happened in Canada over the last 4 or 5 years, I think it's a good 15 to 20%. Ezra, what would you say?
And it depends on the region. I'm originally from the West, from Alberta, which is sort of the Texas of Canada, and it's very free-loving. The provincial motto is strong and free. Other parts of Canada, not so much. I mean, I just wish we had more of that rebellious nature, that revolutionary passion. But remember that when you had your revolution, people who sided with the king, they moved north. They were called United Empire Loyalists. So there is a bit of a history of Canada being a little more submissive, a little more obedient. And by the way, it's led to a wonderful country. Canada is a pretty great place. But over the last 10 years especially, oh my God, have we made some wrong turns.
Yeah.
And I'm really worried about things.
I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Canada. I've been all over Canada, from Vancouver up to Nova Scotia, and probably been there 20 different times in my life. I mean, I've toured and played in from Thunder Bay to small little towns to out in Saskatoon and Calgary and stuff, and it really is very, very similar to the U.S. There was a time where I would say that Canada was like I guess like the U.S., like it's very much like the Midwest. If you're in Fargo, or you're in somewhere in Michigan or up in Minnesota or something, it's very, very similar. You could be in Calgary and mistake yourself for being in the United States very, very easily if you weren't looking at the actual dollar bills.
Wait, I'm from Minnesota. Does that mean I was basically living in Canada the whole time and I didn't know about it?
It's similar, man. It is similar.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.